and I find people very difficult. And when I couldn't take it, I went in my room and shut the door.
Something happened to Georgia O'Keeffe in the summer of 1946 that nobody talks about. She had reached the peak of her career, making history as the first woman featured alone at the Museum of Modern Art. Then her world collapsed. For 10 days, she was gone. But here's the strange part. Nobody reported it. The art world, the press, even her family stayed silent. What could make everyone agree to cover up her disappearance? The answer reveals the darkest secret in American art history. Georgia O'Keeffe was born on November 15, 1887, in a small farmhouse in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. She was the second of 7 children in a hard-working dairy farming family. Even though their life seemed simple, there was something surprising in her family's past. Her grandfather, George Victor Toto, had once been a Hungarian count before moving to America in 1848. But that touch of royalty couldn't protect them from hardship. The family struggled deeply with money. Her father, Francis, failed in several business attempts, and by the time Georgia was a teenager, their farm life had turned into a painful fight for survival. They had once lived well, but now they faced poverty, and that change left a deep mark on her. She learned early on never to depend on anyone else, and that idea stayed with her for the rest of her life. The vast and quiet land around Sun Prairie became Georgia's world. The prairie was lonely, wide, and filled with endless silence, but she found something magical in it. While others may have felt trapped, she looked closely at the details most people ignored: the shape of wildflowers, the curve of dried bones, the way the wind moved through grass. These quiet things spoke to her. She didn't just see nature. She saw patterns, designs, and hidden forms. Her mother, Ida, was distant and elegant even in their rough surroundings, and Georgia grew up with that same quiet, proud air. That mix of isolation and beauty planted the first seeds of the artist she would become. In 1902, her father's last business collapse forced the family to leave Wisconsin. They moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, where he tried making concrete blocks for building houses, but the idea failed again. The financial loss was crushing, and people around them watched the once respected O'Keeffe family fall apart. Georgia's mother was now sick with tuberculosis and spent most of her time in bed. The pain of watching her family fall, the helplessness, and the shame shaped Georgia into someone who wanted control over her own life. She didn't want to rely on anyone, not for love, not for money, not for success. When she was just 10, Georgia began learning watercolor painting from a local artist named Sarah Mann. Her sisters Ida and Anita joined the lessons too. Mann used art books that taught students to copy simple shapes and gradually try harder work. Georgia followed the lessons, but deep down she didn't want to copy others. Even at that young age, she didn't want to paint like everyone else. She wanted to make something new, something personal. One of her earliest watercolors, showing small cherry blossoms, already carried the close-up, focused look that would later make her famous. Her teacher wanted her to stay inside the lines, but Georgia had already started breaking out of them. In 1905, Georgia moved to Chicago and joined the School of the Art Institute. She lived with her uncle and aunts to save money. Her teacher, John Vanderpoel, became one of the few instructors she ever truly respected. She worked hard, rose to the top of her class, and even studied anatomy by dissecting skulls so she could paint them more accurately. But just 1 year later, in 1906, something horrible happened. Georgia caught typhoid fever. The sickness was so severe it took all her strength and even caused her hair to fall out. She had to leave school and return home. She didn't paint for over a year, but during that long recovery, something inside her changed. Facing death made her quieter, deeper, and even more determined to create something that truly mattered. In 1907, she felt strong enough to start again and moved to New York to study at the Art Students League. The teachers there were different. They supported creativity. William Merritt Chase taught her how to make bold strokes with a brush, and in 1908, she won a prize for her painting of a rabbit and copper pot. It earned her a scholarship to a summer school at Lake George. She also started visiting modern art galleries like Stieglitz's 291, where she saw new ideas that stirred something in her. But that same year, disaster returned. Her father went completely bankrupt, and her mother's health got worse. Georgia had no choice. She left the art world and took a job in Chicago as a commercial artist. Her job was to draw ads for lace and fabric. She was fast and good at it, but it felt empty. She hated the work so much that later she burned most of those drawings. She said the smell of turpentine made her sick. For nearly 4 years, she didn't paint at all. That silence was one of the darkest times of her life. In 1910, she got sick again. This time, it was measles, and it hurt her vision. For an artist, that fear was terrifying. She moved to Charlottesville to live with her family. During that recovery, she started making charcoal drawings. They weren't like anything she'd done before. They were abstract. They came from her own thoughts, her feelings, not from a textbook or teacher. That was the moment her art truly changed, and it was only the beginning. In 1911, she returned to her old school, Chatham Episcopal Institute, but this time as a teacher. She didn't follow the rules. She had students draw live models instead of copying still objects. Parents were shocked. They said it wasn't proper for young girls. But Georgia didn't care. She believed in real expression, not old traditions. Her teaching caused a scandal, but it also proved she was ready to lead, not follow. By 1915, everything started to shift. While teaching at Columbia College in South Carolina, she made a series of charcoal drawings inspired by new design ideas she had learned during summer classes. These pieces were bold and completely different from anything else at the time. She sent them to her friend Anita Politzer, who showed them to Alfred Stieglitz in early 1916. He was stunned. He said he couldn't even explain how they made him feel. She was just 28, and suddenly, she had become one of America's first modernist artists. Then came the scandal that would tie her name to his forever. When she met Stieglitz, he was 52 and already married. She was only 29. They began writing letters, thousands of pages. Their words were full of longing and secrets. In 1918, Georgia left her teaching job in Texas and moved to New York. Stieglitz paid her rent, gave her a studio, and helped her live as a full-time artist. But he was still married. The age gap and the affair shocked everyone. Between 1916 and 1918, while in Texas, Georgia created 51 watercolor paintings inspired by Palo Duro Canyon. The deep reds and bold shapes reminded many people of female forms. Critics said they were erotic. The canyon was 800 feet deep and stretched for miles, and she captured its raw power in a way that nobody else had before. One of these paintings, Special Number 21, was stolen from a museum in 2003 and has never been found. In 1918, things got worse. Georgia caught the Spanish flu, which infected millions across the world. Her body ached. She was weak. Her brother, who had gone to war, was attacked with poison gas and died. She fell into a deep sadness. She painted a piece called The Flag that showed her grief. Dark skies, a trembling flag, no stars. She said the flag no longer meant anything to her. That pain and sickness pushed her to finally move to New York for good. But even there, peace didn't come easily. Starting in 1918, Stieglitz began taking photographs of her. He took over 300 pictures, many of them nude. In 1921, he displayed them in a gallery. People saw her bare body, her hands, her chest. Some were shocked. Others called it art. But Georgia later said those photos made her feel exposed, like people saw her body more than her paintings. Still, they helped launch her fame, though not in the way she had hoped. When Georgia O'Keeffe married Alfred Stieglitz on December 11, 1924, it wasn't a fairy tale. It was more like a quiet agreement between two people who needed each other. But it was never simple. He was older, powerful in the art world, and she was rising fast. At first, their strange understanding worked, but in 1928, everything fell apart. Stieglitz started an affair with Dorothy Norman, a married woman 23 years younger than Georgia. The affair wasn't hidden, it was public, painfully public. Dorothy worked closely with Stieglitz, and Georgia had to watch. At the same time, Georgia lost a huge project, a mural for Radio City Music Hall. That loss, and the constant humiliation, broke something inside her. By 1933, she had a complete nervous breakdown and checked into a hospital. She stayed there for 2 months. During that time, she couldn't paint at all. But before that collapse, something amazing had happened. On January 29, 1923, her solo exhibition in New York shocked the art world. 100 of her paintings were shown. On opening day, 500 people came. She wasn't just another artist anymore. She was a sensation, but the reviews were strange. Critics didn't talk about her colors or technique. They talked about her being a woman. Everything was turned into something sexual. Some even claimed her paintings were full of hidden symbols. Still, by 1928, she did something no living American artist had ever done. She sold 6 calla lily paintings for $25,000. That was a fortune back then, worth about $400,000 today. Some believed Stieglitz had arranged the sale through anonymous buyers to raise her value. But whether true or not, the result was real. Georgia now had money, power, and freedom. She didn't have to depend on anyone anymore. Around this same time, critics started whispering something else. They said her skyscraper paintings were full of sexual messages. In 1927, she painted Radiator Building, Night, New York. It was tall, sleek, glowing. She had painted it from her window in the Shelton Hotel, where she lived on the 30th floor. Some critics said the building looked like a symbol of male power. Georgia said that wasn't true, but the attention only grew. Even architectural experts began calling skyscrapers symbols of the American spirit. Her work was now part of a bigger conversation about modern life, gender, and ambition. Then, in 1929, everything shifted again. That summer, Georgia left New York and went west. She had been invited to Taos, New Mexico. The trip changed her completely. The land felt raw and endless. She bought a Ford Model A and learned to drive just to explore the desert. She began collecting animal bones she found in the sand. In 1931, she painted Cow's Skull with Calico Roses. To her, the bones showed beauty, not death. But critics back east didn't understand. They called her new work bizarre and creepy. But Georgia didn't care. She kept going back to the desert every year. Then came 1932, the year everything collapsed. Her Radio City mural fell apart. Literally, the canvas peeled. The project failed. And Stieglitz betrayed her again. He gave her gallery spot to someone else. That was the final blow. Her body reacted. Her heart raced. She couldn't stop crying. She was overwhelmed by headaches. By 1933, she checked herself into the hospital. Doctors said she had psychoneurosis, which meant she was deeply depressed, and her body couldn't take it anymore. She didn't paint for over a year. That silence was the darkest point in her life. During this low point, something else happened. Companies began stealing her style. Her famous close-up flower images started appearing in ads. She hadn't given permission. It was a bold theft. Even though she was still recovering, she fought back. She took them to court. It wasn't about the money. She just wanted to protect her art. She won. The money was small, but the message was big. The court agreed that her unique style couldn't be stolen. This case gave strength to other artists and made her even more determined to work in solitude. In 1934, she discovered Ghost Ranch, a vast desert area in New Mexico. She fell in love with it and spent years trying to buy a small adobe home there. In 1940, she finally did. The house was plain and quiet, perfect for her. She added a big window so she could always see the desert. Nearby was a strange area of black hills she called the Black Place. It looked like waves of stone, almost like elephants from far away. Between 1936 and 1949, She visited the Black Place again and again, painting it with fierce energy. In just 2 years, 1944 and 1945, she completed 6 big canvases, a pastel, and 9 sketches. It was one of the most creative periods of her life. By 1940, she had already painted more than 200 New Mexico landscapes, but one mountain became her favorite. It was flat on top and stood alone. Its name was Cerro Pedernal. She called it her private mountain. She once said, "God told me if I painted it enough, I could have it." Over time, locals even started calling it O'Keefe's Mountain. She painted it again and again, often placing it behind bones or flowers. But she had secrets. She didn't want anyone copying her techniques. She painted in private, no visitors, no distractions. If a painting didn't turn out right, she burned it. She didn't want anyone to ever see her mistakes. After the plagiarism incident in 1933, she had learned to guard her work with everything she had. In 1945, Georgia O'Keeffe was terrified. Letters she had written over 30 years to the man she loved, Alfred Stieglitz, were almost made public. These weren't just sweet notes. They were raw, passionate, and deeply personal. Some lines were so intimate that just reading them could change the way the world saw her. She had written things like, "My body is simply crazy with wanting you." That kind of language, especially from a woman in her position, could have destroyed everything she had worked for. She had always been judged differently. Critics already turned her art into something sexual. Now, her words were about to be used against her too. She knew male artists didn't have to deal with this kind of scrutiny. Their private lives were left alone, but she didn't get that same protection. What made it worse was that Alfred had written things too. He had photographed her naked again and again. His letters showed how obsessed he had been. But no one threatened to publish his words, only hers. So she did something heartbreaking. She burned hundreds of letters. She wanted to keep some control over her life, even if it meant losing pieces of her story forever. It was the only way she felt she could protect herself. The very next year, in May 1946, something huge happened. Georgia became the first woman in history to have a solo show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. 100 of her works were displayed. It should have been the best time of her life. But just 2 months after the show opened, tragedy hit. Alfred died suddenly of a stroke on July 13, 1946. She was devastated. She barely spoke to the press. She couldn't even bring herself to promote the exhibition. On top of that, 3 of her paintings were stolen from the show. They were never found. It was supposed to be a celebration of everything she had accomplished. Instead, it felt like her world had fallen apart. In 1950, Georgia left everything behind and moved permanently to Abiquiu, New Mexico. She wanted peace, but even there, she pushed herself harder than ever. In 1965, she created a painting so big it stretched 24 feet wide. She called it Sky Above Clouds 4. She worked on it every day, starting at 6 in the morning and painting late into the evening. The garage she used wasn't even heated, and she was always scared that a rattlesnake might crawl under the canvas while she worked. But she didn't stop. That painting would later sell for record-breaking prices. People started calling her one of the most valuable living American artists. But with success came new problems. In the 1980s, fake Georgia O'Keeffe paintings started showing up in galleries. Some were sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars before experts realized they were forgeries. The problem became so serious that Georgia had to personally step in. She looked at the paintings herself and told people which ones were real. Some collectors got angry. They had spent a fortune on fakes. Lawsuits followed. Her name was dragged into courtrooms. Even though she had nothing to do with the forgeries, her legacy got tied up in all that mess. One of the strangest things happened in 1959. Georgia, now 72, was traveling through Europe, but she wasn't carrying fancy clothes or art supplies in her luggage. Instead, she packed bones, real bones, cow skulls, horse bones, even sheep skulls. She told everyone they were her essential art materials. When French customs officers scanned her suitcase at Charles de Gaulle Airport, they thought they had found human remains. They stopped her immediately. Georgia got angry. She yelled at them in broken French and held onto one of the skulls like it was a baby. Reporters snapped photos of her being escorted through the airport, still gripping her bones. People later said she would arrange those bones in her hotel rooms and talk to them as if they were alive. It shocked everyone. Then came 1977. Georgia was 90 years old. President Gerald Ford gave her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in America. Everyone saw her as this strong, fearless woman who had lived life on her own terms. But during a private moment at the White House, she said something no one expected. She told a journalist she had one big regret. She had never become a mother. She said Alfred had made her choose. He didn't want kids. He told her they would ruin her art and their relationship, and so she chose art. But standing there, holding that medal, she said quietly, "I chose wrong." She revealed something even more painful. She had actually been pregnant 3 times in the 1920s and 30s, but each time she lost the baby. Alfred didn't comfort her. He told her the miscarriages were blessings. She said those words haunted her. Sometimes she dreamed about the children she never had. She admitted she had been secretly collecting toys her whole life and hiding them in her home. No one knew. Everyone had believed she didn't want children. But the truth was very different. When Alfred Stieglitz had a stroke in July 1946, Georgia O'Keeffe flew from New Mexico to New York right away. She stayed by his side until he died on July 13th at the age of 82. But what happened next shocked everyone. Georgia made the decision to cremate him, something his family never expected. It went against their traditions and caused deep tension. And just before he passed, Georgia asked Dorothy Norman, the woman who had been Stieglitz's mistress for years, to leave the hospital room. That moment was powerful. It ended a long and painful chapter that had haunted Georgia since the 1920s. Even though her marriage with Stieglitz had grown cold, she wasn't going to let anyone else control how it ended. After his death, she found herself buried in paperwork. From 1946 to 1949, she worked non-stop to handle Stieglitz's massive estate. It had over 4,000 pieces of art and thousands of letters. She donated many of them to big museums like the Met. But it wasn't easy. His family and others fought back, questioning her choices and accusing her of favoring certain works. The records were so detailed and overwhelming that she needed help just to organize them. During those years, she stayed in New York more than she wanted to. Her own painting had to wait while she protected Stieglitz's legacy. By 1949, the pressure finally caught up to her. She got very sick, though she never spoke much about it. People close to her said she was exhausted, physically and emotionally. But even while recovering, she never truly stopped painting. She worked on smaller pieces from her bedside, refusing to fully let go of her art. That same year, she decided to leave New York behind for good and made New Mexico her permanent home. It was a huge turning point. She was leaving the world that had made her famous and stepping into the desert that had always pulled at her spirit. That same year, she did something almost no one expected. She destroyed many of the intimate photos that Stieglitz had taken of her, especially the nude portraits. These pictures had once helped make her famous. They showed the deep passion between them and were praised for their beauty. But Georgia didn't want to be remembered just as someone's muse. She wanted control over her own image, so she carefully chose which ones to keep and which to burn. She gave some to museums and to Dorothy Norman, but the rest were gone forever. Some say those destroyed prints would be worth millions today. In 1968, when she was already in her 80s, she began losing her eyesight due to macular degeneration. By 1971, at age 84, she could barely see straight ahead. Most people expected her to stop painting, but Georgia refused. She kept working, using assistants to help her create huge paintings. She described what she saw in her mind, and they followed her instructions like an orchestra following a conductor. She also turned to clay, since she could feel it with her hands. Even without sight, she never lost her creative power. Her new works were different, but still bold and full of life. Then, in 1973, when she was 86, something happened that sent shockwaves through the art world. A 27-year-old potter named Juan Hamilton came to her door asking for pottery advice. But soon, he became much more than that. He became her assistant, her driver, her companion, and maybe even more. People whispered about their relationship, calling it scandalous. The age gap was 58 years. Some called it strange. Georgia called it funny. She said, "Men artists always have young women, but people are shocked if I have a young man." He took care of her, traveled with her to Morocco, and stayed by her side through her final years. When she passed in 1986, she left him nearly everything: her houses, her artworks, and most of her $70 million estate. In 1976, she released an autobiography that shocked readers. It was only about 1,000 words long, but full of impact. She started it by saying, "Where I was born and where and how I lived is unimportant." She focused on what she did with her life, not where she came from. She barely mentioned her marriage or her mental breakdown in 1932, when she had spent 2 years in psychiatric care. Still, the book became a bestseller. She designed every page herself and wanted it to be the only real story of her life. But many readers were left wanting more. In 1978, at age 90, she found herself in court. A banker had bought 28 watercolors, said to be hers, for $5.5 million. But experts began questioning if they were real. Georgia, nearly blind, testified in court. Her mind was still sharp, and she stood her ground. The trial exposed how difficult it can be to prove who made what in the world of art. Later, in 1993, another fraud case came to light. A woman had been selling fake copies of Georgia's sculptures for thousands of dollars each. The copies had cost just a few hundred to make, but buyers had paid up to $5,500. In 1984, Georgia's health became so fragile that she had to leave her beloved Abiquiu home and move to Santa Fe. She had spent 38 years painting in northern New Mexico, but now she was 97 and couldn't handle the isolation anymore. Even though she was blind, she kept creating by describing her visions out loud. Assistants painted for her, following her every word. She created dreamy images of the desert from memory. Juan Hamilton took care of her, making sure her final months were full of peace and art. She passed away in Santa Fe on March 6, 1986, at the age of 98. After her death, something remarkable happened. Georgia had asked for her ashes to be scattered on Pedernal Mountain, the flat-topped mesa she had painted again and again. She once said, "God told me if I painted it enough, I could have it." That wish was fulfilled. As her ashes were scattered, the wind carried them across the desert dust, blending her with the mountain forever. But peace didn't last long. Her will became the center of a massive legal fight. Just days before she died, she had signed papers giving Juan Hamilton not just 10%, but 70% of her fortune. Her family was furious. Her sister and grandniece accused Hamilton of tricking her. They said he used her money to buy luxury cars and a $2.6 million house where his ex-wife and kids lived. The court battle got ugly, but in July 1987, they reached a deal. Hamilton walked away with $2 million for some art and the Ghost Ranch property. The rest went to the new Georgia O'Keeffe Foundation.